Remember that whenever we declare a variable, that means that we're allocating memory to store some value in that variable. So a question we need to ask is, how long do we have that memory? Do we have it forever? And the answer to that is no. Every single variable has what we call a lifetime, which means whenever we're done using that variable, we don't need that memory allocated for that variable. We can free up that memory. That way we can use it for some other variable or some other procedure or function. Or if we kept that variable even though we weren't using it, we're just wasting memory at that point. So what is the lifetime of a variable? Well, it depends on where it's declared. So for example, all local variables, with the exception of static variables, which we'll talk about in just a minute, local variables are freed when we're done with a particular method. So we call a method, we declare a variable in there, we'll use the variable, and when we're done with that method, we know that we're not going to use any of those local variables anymore, so we can free up the memory and use it for something else. Now the other variables, the global variables that are declared outside the methods, they're freed when we're done with the entire program, because since they're declared outside of methods, they could be used in any single method or several methods, so we don't know for sure when we're done with a variable until we're done with the program. Now, what about static variables? We mentioned that these act a little bit differently compared to the other variables that we've talked about. So whenever we have a static variable and declare it, it actually stays in memory until the program is done. Now you might think this doesn't seem any different than global variables, right? We declare it and we keep it until the program is done. How are the two any different? The big difference with static variables is this is true even if the variable is declared inside of a method. So this is a case where we have technically a local variable, but its lifetime is the same as a global variable. So we declare it in a method, and then it stays until the entire program is done. Now you might be thinking, why would we do this? Well, let me kind of just go with me on this. So let's say we do declare a static variable. Normally we would use this in a method. It doesn't do us any good to declare it outside of any method because global variables already last the entire program. But let's say I declare a local variable and I say that it's going to be static and we give it some value. What makes this type of variable interesting is that let's say we finish that method and then we call the method again. Whatever value was in that static variable stays. Unlike the other variables where if I call the method a second time, we reallocate the memory for not the static variables, but for all the variables. So that means all those variables are reinitialized. The static variables, they stay in our memory, they never go away. So whatever was stored in there before remains whenever we come back. So if I call a method a second time and use a static variable, it's going to use whatever it had the first time we called the method. We'll now take a look at an example of the difference between static and non-static variables. So we're going to actually write some code in a form and actually show what happens when we keep calling the same method for non-static variables, and then we'll see what happens when we change them to static variables. So in this example, we're going to create a button where when we click on it, it's going to add 5 to a local variable. So to do that, we need a button. So let's go ahead and add a button. So we'll go to our toolbox, we'll go to button, and then I'll just put it right here. We're not worried too much about all the properties, but we'll go ahead and do a couple things here. We'll call the name, or the text, let's see here. The text here, we'll call it, let's see here. We'll call it my button. Or no, we'll just call it add. We'll call it add 5 because that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to add 5 to our value, and we're going to change the name of the button. So that should be right here. We'll call it BT1. All right. So now let's double click on the button, and then we get our sub procedure for it. So what we're going to do is we'll create an integer. So we'll do dim. We'll call this num as integer. And let's initialize it to 10. And then we're going to
let's just say, well, we said we're going to add 5, so we'll do num equals num plus 5. And then we'll show that result. So message box dot show num. All right, there we go. So let's run this real quick. So we see, here's our form, and then if we click on our button here, we see that we get 15. The reason we get that is what we did in here is we declared an integer variable called num, initialized it to 10, we add 5 to it, and then we display that result. So we can click OK. And every single time I click on this button, we call the sub procedure again, and what we see is every single time what happens is, well, num gets declared when we call the procedure, and then when the sub is done, that variable no longer exists. So we keep reinitializing num to 10, and then we add 5 to it. So this is never going to change. It's always going to give me 15, because the way the procedure works is we have some initial value of 10, we add 5 to it, and then we display that result. And that's all this does. Now let's try something else. So we're going to exit the program, and instead of using a local variable or a traditional local variable, we're going to make this a static variable. So what we'll do is we replace dim with static. Okay, so now let's see what happens. So we're going to click on start, maybe. Okay, there is our form. So now let's click it one time. Okay, we still get 15 because, I mean, the same thing happens here because we declare our variable num. It's initially 10, we add 5 and we display it. Okay, that doesn't seem too far off. Let's try clicking on it again. We get 20. So what happened there? Well, remember, the way a static variable works is even though the sub procedure is done, this variable still exists. It's still stored in our memory. So since it was 15 last time, when we come back, this line, think of it as just pretty much being ignored. So we go to this line and we add 5 to 15, which is 20. So that's where we get 20. So if that's correct, then the next time I click on this button, we should get 25. There we go. We get 25. So we can repeat clicking on this and keep adding 5 to our number. But the whole point here is to show that with a static variable, after it's declared, it stays with us until the program is done.